Hey everybody, Tim here, back for another Chicago Northwestern Harvard Subdivision in N scale, and you are looking at the entrance where the tracks come out of the staging yard and then move into the main area. And that's because I started off the week by fixing how those tracks transition between the piece there. You can see there's a shim that I put, and the reason I did that is because for some of my locomotives, and you can tell from the speed I sped this footage up, for some of the four-wheel locomotives, they would get caught on this far left track, and it was because there was a slight kind of peak. Both sides of the rails were raising to the point where it kind of like it almost bottomed out on the fuel tank. So what I did was I used that shim to try and create a more ease it into the elevation. And then what I did is I then put nails under the rails and soldered it to also make sure it was a smoother. The rails were more smooth into the curve at the transition without the ties holding it in place. They weren't really holding the shape I wanted them to. So after I did some tweaking, as you can see, using one of the 4-axle locomotives, it was able to pull auto racks just fine, which meant it was time for my least favorite part of the hobby, or to start it at least, ballasting. Arizona Rock and Mineral does carry an N-scale ballast in the famous pink granite that the Chicago Northwestern used, and so it was time to get started. And I've got this footage literally sped up to 2,000% the actual speed, because slow and steady and patient is how I try and approach my ballasting, and I'm even willing to do multiple passes. You know, one thing I learned on the first version of the layout, I used Atlas code 55, and obviously I'm using Pico. Pico's code 55, remember, is different. It's actually code 80, but a good chunk of the rail is embedded into the ties. That does change the profile a little bit, and it changed up a little bit how the track interacted with the ballast that I was putting down. And so I found that I would actually have to go and kind of add more, especially to the side rails. It was pretty easy to control the height of the ballast between the ties, but on the sides, and you can kind of see in the front there, with the closest track to what the footage is showing you right now, you can see that underlayer under the rail is exposed, and it doesn't look natural, right? Because you have this white line under the rail, and it looks odd. So, you know, making sure that that's covered is important. You can see I spray with isopropyl alcohol, and then I use an eyedropper, and I have diluted matte medium. So I take Mod Podge, and dilute it down with water. And that's how I approach doing the ballast. And this is a continuation of a theme that I said in last week's video, which is my goal is to take care of some of the pretty critical tasks in building a layout a little bit at a time. So my goal for this week was to get the ballasting done for this. This is about a 4-foot stretch, right? Get it done for this stretch. So that way I don't have a ton of ballasting waiting for me, you know, doing all the bench work and then turning to ballasting. It'll be a while before I ballast the next section. I have the lift out section, and then after that, I'm still finalizing how I want to approach Arlington Heights. So I don't want to, get ballast down until I'm really for sure about what the surrounding scenery is going to look like. But again, even with this, and it wasn't terrible. I would do it in about 30-minute chunks, is how I would do my ballasting. And you can see I'm careful to make sure that I really want to saturate it. I really want to make sure, because you can see it's really soaking up that diluted matte medium, and it's almost sinking away to the point where you can't see it. And you'll notice that the ballast is going up onto the hill over there. That's okay, because the prototype in real life, the ballast runs down the slope of the hill, for most of the hill. Actually, it runs down it pretty close to the road, and so I didn't have a problem with that. I did definitely want to make sure to be careful around the switch, making sure that I don't put too much in, but you also don't want to leave it out, so there's not enough ballast around the points, because then it just looks really weird and unnatural, and it's hard to see with this how much I sped up the time. But I am from time to time tapping with the end of the brush to help just settle settle all the ballast, because otherwise, if you don't, when you spray it down and then when you put the glue on, it'll sink. Then I mean, it's going to settle one way or another. So you can either control when it's going to settle and make sure it's shaped properly. Otherwise, you might have to go back and make more adjustments. And I'm not done. Like I said, another thing that I want to stress is I'm not going to rush a task to get it done in time to show you on the video. My goal with these videos is to show you what I'm able to accomplish in a given week. So the ballasting on this part of the layout is not done. I need to go back and, like I said, fix some areas near the side of the ties where it didn't quite pan out right. And there's a few spots where for some reason I didn't get enough in between the ties inside the rails, and so I'm going to put a little bit down there, right? But again, my goal is to make sure that I'm not rushing these for the sake of putting it out on YouTube or just rushing it for the sake of checking it off the to-do list. I don't mind the fact that I have to go back and work on it, and I want to put some weeds and other things inside in between the rails as well, to kind of break up the monotony of what is a pretty big chunk of pink rock. It's taking up a good chunk. So you can see what it looks like, and it looks a little shiny still because I took this video when it was still drying. And again, the advantage of the diluted Mod Podge is it does dry with a matte finish versus some glues can have kind of a more glossy sheen to it, which can kind of mess things up. But this doesn't, and so I was happy with how it turned out. You can see some ballast pooled at the bottom down the road. I went ahead and vacuumed that after this because I didn't put any glue down there, so there was that wasn't a big deal. And the slope that I did isn't perfect; it's a little bit too high. The slope in real life is closer to like 7 or 8 feet. This is a good 10, 11 feet in difference, but I was able to make it work. For some reason, I completely brain farted. I'll talk about the scenery in a minute. But another piece that I did is I installed my first of the Caboose Industries ground throws. These are not just their standard ground throws; they are actually used to power the frog on a switch. So what it does is you can see there's 3 metal prongs, but then there's a contact point here, and then depending on how you switch the ground throw, only 2 points are making contact at any given time. So the middle prong is wired, and you can see I use yellow wire here. That's the wire that connects straight to the frog, and then the other 2 are your positive, negative, your 2 rails. And so again, depending on how you throw it, only the red or the black is in contact. And so I worked on that. The other piece I did to kind of update things was I used Sculptamold to fix the slopes for the ease up into the bridge, and I'll start working on the bridge maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. I'll come back and take that on as a project. But again, unfortunately, after this, I just kind of brain farted and forgot to really take work in progress videos to show you, the scenery. This was really probably the closest one that I took, and you can see, the glue is still drying. This is fresh. Again, this scenery is not done. I need to get a lighter color ground cover to kind of blend in. I did some static grass in some places, and I did some darker kind of ground cover in a few places. So I want to get a color somewhat in the middle to help blend it, so that way it doesn't seem like a patch. And you can see here as I bring it back to this, a distinct patch of static grass and a distinct patch of the ground cover. I'll work on blending that together. But to take you back, this is a pretty quick update because the ballasting did take a lot of time to get, just the one task done, but I'm pleased with how it looked. Next week, though, and somebody commented on this in the last video, next week I will get back to building another about 4 feet of bench work and laying track, and then after that I'll be pausing, and that's simply because in order to build the next chunk of the layout, we actually need to build. I have a friend that's going to help me, is going to have to help me build a wall. I want to go ahead and fully frame a wall so that way I can continue to mount my bench work to a wall. But that's obviously going to be that's going to be a significant investment in both time and money to get that up. And so, but I do want to get the next section of bench work, so that'll be a main part of what I show you next week. along with continuing to add a little bit of scenery in this initial 4-foot section right here. So thanks very much again for watching. Please continue to like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week for another update on what's going on the Harvard Sub. Thanks, y'all.